So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our fifth and last session of ConNext 2021, which is dedicated to musical instruments. My name is Friederike Wentig of the Cologne Institute of Conservation Sciences at the University of Applied Sciences Cologne, oder auch Technische Hochschule Köln.
Yes, and my name is Andreas Krupa, and I'm of the same institute, the CICS.
We both will be hosting the session of today, which formed, because it just happened that the call for papers had a strong response to five others from the special field of musical instruments, conservation and restoration. And most of you know what follows now. So before we proceed with our introduction, let's set out some basic rules of conduct, also for this late session of the series. Please make sure your microphone and webcam are turned off. Just do not disturb our presenters during their talk and save some bandwidth. We encourage you to ask questions. You will have the opportunity to do so in the chat box only. Just follow the checkbox. We will cherry pick some of the questions for the Q&A sessions. Our sessions will be recorded for archival reasons and for the possibility of opening it up towards a broader audience. We ensure that this will only happen when we receive consent from our speakers. And finally, this is a conference for and by students. Please respect one another for their exceptional and remarkable effort making this event happen. Some of the speakers will be presenting for a large audience for their very first time. So please keep that in mind. And the next part 2 of our session routine is let to know how ConNext came into being and what we try to achieve. This is a joint effort of the conservation training programs of the universities of Antwerp, Amsterdam, Hildesheim, Cologne, Potsdam, and Lincoln, all within the field of wood and furniture conservation, as well as object conservation. Thus, the universities cover a wide range of specializations. Our ambition is to connect you, the students, with your international colleagues and give you the opportunity to share your work and to get to know new people. We know these are strange times, especially for you who have such different expectations of what your time at the university would be like. But better days seem to be ahead. One of the very few advantages of our getting used to these virtual environments is that it has made sharing our knowledge on an international level easier, and we have the opportunity to more connect than ever. I don't want to get into numbers now, but I want to thank you all for your interest. This is really impressive. Education is paramount for the future of our field, and it starts with sharing your contributions to the development of our profession. Let's share our hard work, experiences, and knowledge. As the organizers of ConNext, we hope to lower the threshold for you to send in an abstract for the conferences like that of ICOM-CC, Ebenist, or future talks. So let ConNext be a start of an international network, and hopefully in the future we will have a drink together, live and not virtually. Now, we hope you are as excited as we are to kick off again the session with one of the many established keynote speakers that were so kind and eager to participate in this series. Let's ConNext.
Thank you, Friederike. Let's have a start now. It's a very big pleasure for me to introduce our today keynote speaker, Professor Friedemann Hellwig. Friedemann Hellwig is an acknowledged world expert in the conservation of musical instruments. He retired in 2003, but soon you will see that he will never retire completely. He grew up in one of the gates of the old town of Lübeck, a medieval city at the Baltic Sea. In the gate building, his father Günther Hellwig operated a violin maker's workshop and his mother Arlene Müller-Hellwig a weaver workshop. From 1957 to 1959, he was trained to be a violin maker at Mittenwald in southern Germany. After initial years of his professional life in London, he returned to Lübeck, where he succeeded to become a master craftsman in the field of violin making. 1963, Friedemann started his career in the field of conservation restoration at the Germanisches Nationalmuseum Nürnberg and stayed here for 23 years. 1986, he transferred to Brauweiler Abbey in the near of Cologne. He took up the task to establish new conservation restoration workshops of the Museum Office of the Rhineland. 1987, very soon, he switched from Brauweiler to Cologne, where he was appointed to be one of the first professors of the new study program Conservation Restoration at the Fachhochschule Köln, which is the former name of Technische Hochschule Köln. Since then, he has been the head of the furniture conservation class, which under his command became an important hub for the conservation restoration of furniture and wooden objects, and of course, musical instruments. After his official retirement in 2003, together with his wife Barbara Hellwig, he devoted himself to further research concerning the famous violin maker Joachim Tielke. Research ended in the 2011 publication Joachim Tielke, Kunstvolle Musikinstrumente des Barock, a thick and very rich book. Joachim Tielke will appear later this evening in the contribution of Kaja Schonfelder. Friedemann, the floor is yours.
Where are my slides now?
They should be there.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Right. You want me to start? Okay.
Yes, please start.
Good evening, everybody. Online tonight, continental Europeans and insular Europeans. It is an honor and a privilege to have been asked to give the keynote speech at this evening's session. I'd like to talk about looking back and ahead, musical instrument conservation as usual, ? As you've just heard from Andreas, musical instruments have occupied me all my life, and to some degree, they're still occupying me today. Having reached an age with an 8 in front offers me the opportunity of looking back with some criticism onto my own time and to my own activity as a conservator, and also beyond that, onto my immediate predecessors and their predecessors. Restoration of musical instruments has taken place for many, many years on the request of musicians, of private collectors, and of museum managers. The majority of early treatments were directed towards regaining the possibility of using an instrument. Repair, restoration, and renovation were hardly to be distinguished at that time. Amongst the men, I'm sorry, no women, active in this early period were a number of highly skilled pioneers. To name just a few, I'd like to mention Arnold Dolmetsch, Auguste Tolbeck, Hermann Seifert, Otto Marx, Friedrich Ernst, and younger specialists have retired during the past years: Scott Odell, John Coster, Robert Barclay, Michel Robin, Michael Latcham, Klaus Martius, So for you young students of conservation, the stage should be open for the next generation. We all know that the restorer conservator's profession has evolved from the traditional crafts of carpentry, gold and silver, jewelry making, painting, violin making, organ building. While it is nowadays out of the question to employ a painter as a painting's conservator, there are good reasons to offer a job as a furniture conservator to someone who's learned traditional carpentry, under the condition that he or she has attended a proper conservation course afterwards. Fortunately, the attitude of offering a museum job as a restorer to a person who has experience merely in carpentry has come to an end. Likewise, the public is beginning to understand that to take care of his or her treasured furniture requires more. To make my point clear, having learned carpentry is a good basis for taking part in a conservation course, assuming that the candidate will overcome his or her way of thinking and acting as a craftsman, craftswoman, and that he or she will feel responsible for preserving a piece of cultural heritage. The same is true for the field of musical instruments. Besides having worked with different organic and inorganic materials, a violin maker knows that 1/10 of a millimeter is dimension not to be neglected in quite a few cases. A wind instrument maker acquired skills in a number of various techniques such as turning or soldering. These skills will prove useful when taking part in an academic conservation training, but there is more required from a musical instrument conservator restorer, a skill which is usually acquired during his or her younger years, that is to be able to play at least one musical instrument and to dispose of at least basic knowledge of music theory and history. To me, this is an absolute prerequisite. This seems like traditional thinking, but working with musical instruments without the love of music? Looking through the extensive internet list of conservation courses, there is worldwide not a single course exclusively devoted to musical instruments. This does not cause me to panic, since this situation is explained and justified by the extremely small number of such specialists needed per year. Assuming there were such a course, further specialization would be asked. Only large public collections and museums could afford to have more than one conservator restorer, and if so, for only a few of the many special fields. If an institution can afford a conservator restorer at all, he or she would have to deal with a wide variety of instruments. This is all the more true for those working freelance. Considering this situation, I feel that a student of, let's say, objects conservation has gained an excellent qualification for entering the world of musical instrument conservation. Certainly, other conservation training courses are equally suitable for the purpose. It so much depends on the individual student's commitment, on internships or placements in musical instrument labs, and finally, on the expectation of a future employer or, in other cases, the courage of working freelance. In any case, training in an academic conservation course offers ample opportunity to come to know the various procedures and kinds of treatment, traditional and scientific examination and documentation methods. This will enable the young conservator, when working self-reliant, to apply what he or she has learned to do with musical instruments in his care, and or to transfer methods originally developed for other fields to his or her own task. Thus, he or she has become a true professional who, of course, will never stop learning. I'm pleased to know of several cases where the way to professionalism just described that has led to highly satisfactory results. At least it is what occasionally comes back to me. Well, should musical instrument conservation go on as usual, as before? Yes and no. I've seen stunning and unexpected results of treatment, such as the work done on the theorbo by Joachim Tielke 1678. This had suffered so badly by an aerial mine in the Bavarian National Museum. It was so badly crushed that it looked like a complete loss. Klaus Martius, who's just retired from the Germanisches Nationalmuseum Nürnberg, did an amazing, beautiful job, which makes one completely forget the instrument's previous state. There are many more examples of this kind. This reminds me of a saying of Robert Barclay's, Canadian conservator with eminent experience in various kinds of instruments. Well, he rightly said that the success of a treatment depends on the dramatic effect of the photographs taken before the treatment. Many a treatment is aiming at regaining the possibility of using an instrument. Of course, why not? To be played, that is what instruments were made for. Okay, with the exception of some of the most beautiful instruments, some were made for honor and prestigious purpose, like the marble instruments or the viola da gamba, which is too delicately constructed to be played. Let us disregard these particular instruments and ask again, isn't it only natural to bring an instrument back to what it was originally made for? This is a question that is being discussed with fervor for at least 50 years. The matter of dispute is this: is an instrument meaningless unless played, or is it a cultural document to be preserved untouched? One of the most frequently found obstacles is that almost every instrument has undergone alteration to some minor or major degree. And restoration to playability means further alteration. Then there's the assertion that an instrument is decaying unless it is regularly played. There's a lot of myth about this point, leading to the routine that all those most valuable Cremonese violins in the City Hall of Cremona are taken out at regular intervals out of their showcases and are played for I don't know how many minutes. To me, this is absurd. One way out of the conflict of playing yes or no is the making of copies, which may be a wonderful change to the daily work in the lab. The example you see here is an experimental instrument of very early date, which was found to be unplayable even after treatment. To be more serious, there is a number of articles and books dealing with this topic of playing or not. Let me mention just two publications: The Care of Musical Instruments of 1997 and The Preservation and Use of Historic Musical Instruments, Display Case or Concert Hall of 2004, written by Robert Barclay, who retired from the Canadian Conservation Institute only a few years ago. It is interesting to note that nearly all contributions on this subject are from North America and England. There is more to be found in AATA, the Arts and Archaeology Technical Abstracts, and also, surprisingly enough, in Wikipedia, with a lot of good ideas. I would wish There were sets of rules for some of the most ardent questions that would help both musicians and conservators. This I see as a task for the next generation of conservators. There's an example that could be a model for working out these rules. In 1985, so quite some time ago, several conservators, I was privileged to be among them, were invited to Antwerp for a couple of days in order to compile a document which was finally published under the title of Recommendations for Regulating the Access to Musical Instruments in Public Collections. This paper, issued by CICS, the International Committee of Musical Instruments Museums within ICOM, the International Council of Museums, profits from ICOM's high reputation. The paper, has not lost value. It has been widely accepted by institutions, by museums, as a means of reducing the damage done by some instrument makers when handling instruments for the purpose of taking measurements for making copies. CICS also issued the just mentioned The Care of Musical Instruments, edited by, again, Robert Barclay, most useful in many ways. Yes, it's ethics. Ethics is a top subject with musical instruments and one that needs continued updating. To me, CICS would be the appropriate frame to do this. Why? Because it is, to my knowledge, the only committee where curators and conservators are sitting together, and this with equal rights. I wish that conservators would take an active role in this committee as they once did, as it is here that ethics can be discussed with curators who always feel the obligation to present and use original instruments in public performances as a raison d'être of how to protect cultural heritage. In CICS, conservators can fight for their view of how to protect the heritage, and if necessary, might be forced to descend from their high horse of being the only true saviors of the treasures they so much care for. The final outcome could and should be a set of recommendations for solving the questions of whether to play or not to play in individual cases, and no general wish-wash. In any case, this is something I hope the next generation can achieve on international scale. The collaboration between curator and conservator can accomplish more. When an acquisition for the collections is pending, it's traditionally the curator who decides just by himself. There are certainly more sad examples than the one I'm thinking of, where a conservator's experience and technological expertise could have prevented building up a collection of fakes at enormous costs. The collaboration of trust between curator and conservator is hopefully also achieved by the position you young conservators are going to take, that of academically trained professionals, well capable of bringing forward informed arguments in a dispute. And one day you will hopefully be considered of equal importance to a collection and on a par with the curator. With regard to literature on hands-on work, there are already many contributions to periodicals and also a few handbooks, such as Stuart Pollen's Manual of Musical Instrument Conservation of 2015, or The Conservation, Restoration, and Repair of Stringed Instruments and Their Bows, edited by Tom Wilder. Very useful, but unfortunately exceedingly expensive. More is needed. Imagine, for instance, a manual on how to care for violin varnishes, which is anything but trivial with regard to their varying composition and the loss of original material in the past and probably still ongoing today. This is just one topic. You will easily find more. A wide field to explore is the use of modern techniques, both in the examination and treatment. CT examination has become a standard method. I was impressed to see also neutron imaging, visualizing how a brass instrument player's respiration is precipitating in the tubing. No such techniques have to be developed specifically for musical instruments. Just go and observe what others are doing and make their achievements fruitful for your own field. All apparent progress and advancements in examination techniques suitable for our field are already on hand. We've just got to find and use them. And a good training course will teach you how to formulate intelligent questions and comprehend the answers. But watch out. One gets so easily lost in the fascinating world of promising modern gadgets while pressing duties and responsibilities and urgent first aid measures might be overlooked. Summing up, working as a musical instrument conservator is so fascinating because it's working with objects of a wide variety of constructions, with objects from so many cultures, countries and continents, with an unbelievable spectrum of materials, with objects that have undergone alterations with changing musical requirements. Working with musical instruments often gives rewarding contacts with musicians and makers, and it can make you and help others better understand and even more enjoy what is perhaps the greatest of all arts, music. Thank you.
Thank you, Friedemann, for this really inspiring talk. And I really liked much that you said that the students have to look around to see what others are doing. I think this is a very, very important talk. Yeah, so thanks a lot. And I'm sure there will be a few questions for our Q&A sessions later in the chat. So now we are going on with the first talk. And I would like to give Susanne Klug the opportunity to show us her research on an early piano, which was built in the second half of the 18th century. Susanne Klug is the student at the CICS in Cologne. And yeah, let us hear more about the piano and its conservation concept. Susanne, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear and see me.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this event because I think it's a great opportunity for us to share our work. Today, I will present you my conservation concept for an early square piano. I want to start with a short description of the object and its condition before I will share my thoughts and approach to develop a conservation concept. The square piano was constructed in the second half of the 18th century, probably towards the end of the century. The instrument comes from the Museum Schloss Homburg in Nürnberg. The construction of the instrument can be divided into three main parts: the case with the musical apparatus, 4 prim legs, and the 2-part lid with a music desk. Especially the different coatings are characteristic of the object, such as the graining on the case and the tortoiseshell imitation on the inner surface of the lid and some parts of the musical apparatus, like the hitchpin block. For those of you who haven't dealt with keyboard instruments yet, I would like to give a brief introduction into the technical vocabulary and describe the construction of the musical apparatus inside the case. The resonance range is on the right side. A straight bridge is diagonally fixed on the soundboard. The strings are wrapped round the tuning pins, which are plugged into the rest plank. On the left side, the strings are attached to the hitchpin block. In front of the hitchpin block, there is the keyboard, including 5 octaves. On the left side, right next to the keyboard, there is a little storage compartment, which can be used to store, for example, a tuning hammer. The instrument has a German action, so-called Prellmechanik. It is a quite simple piano action mechanism, which was already used at an early stage in the historical development of actions. The square piano has a very interesting object biography, especially with regard to different alterations that have been made over time. Some of the alterations have been made professionally, such as the graining on the case, but others are carried out quite unprofessionally. For example, the added bridge that is made of a straight wood strip with serrated sheet metal, quite similar to a saw blade. It is obvious that this bridge has been added later, such as the fixation of the strings with screws that can be found in the hitchpin block. The strings are also not original, and above the soundboard and the rest plank a wooden strip was added, probably to stabilize the construction. Further alterations can be identified. This includes the legs and also the main part of the lid. As you can see in the picture, the main part of the lid below is different from the anterior part of the lid that has a tortoiseshell imitation on the inner surface. The main part of the lid shows a raw wooden surface and has no veneer on the outer surface, like the interior part. The graining on the case is also not original. It probably has been applied in the 19th century or the early 20th century. At this time, this technique was mainly used. Probably the case was originally veneered analogous to the cheeks next to the keyboard and the outer surface of the interior part of the lid. The cheeks and the outer surface of the lid are veneered with walnut wood. Perhaps the veneer was damaged, which is why it was removed, or the alteration only shows a contemporary taste. To give you a short impression of the condition of the object, I want to summarize some major problems. The object was very dirty. Dirt deposits have accumulated, especially under the keys, as you can see in the left picture. The coatings show different kinds of damages, such as craquelure and abrasion. Furthermore, most of the metal elements are corroded, such as the balance and the tuning pins. Unfortunately, the instrument was infested by insects. Not only the bottom of the legs and the interior part of the lid are affected, but also most of the elements of the object. There are some stability problems in the construction, for example, the unstable legs and a broken hinge between the two parts of the lid. Some elements are detached or got lost, for example, some parts of the key coverings, but there are also lacunae in the veneer on top of the lid. Some main parts of the instrument are missing, like the nameboard and the original S-shaped bridge. You can see a digital reconstruction of the corpus with nameboard in the left picture, and the shape of the original bridge in the mapping on the right side. Furthermore, there are some shrinkage cracks, for example at the bottom board and the side boards of the case. Especially in the soundboard, there are many cracks, which are marked green in the mapping here. The two cracks in the lid are particularly problematic because they are stressed when opening the lid. Now that you have an impression of the object and its condition, I will explain my conservation concept. First of all, I want to explain some basic thoughts that are important to the decision-making process. One important point is the future context of the object. Where and how should it be exhibited? Furthermore, it should be clarified why the object is worth preserving. Which values does it have and what are the interest groups? Afterwards, some aims and approaches can be discussed. Based on these aims, the measures can be planned and carried out. Now I would like to briefly summarize my findings. It can be said that the square piano is in a poor condition with many different kinds of damages. The appearance is affected by some alterations which differ in quality. The instrument is not playable anymore because of the poor condition of the musical apparatus and the inappropriate alterations that have been made. So what is the future context of the instrument? The square piano should be exhibited at the Museum Schloss Homburg, but the exhibition situation is still unsettled. Because the museum has no collection of musical instruments, the object could become a part of a special exhibition rather than being integrated into the permanent exhibition of the museum. Let's have a look at the interest groups and the values of the object. The main interest groups of the object are the museum, the visitors of the museum, and science. The object has got three main values that justify the preservation: historical, technical, and also artistic values. Concerning the interest groups, it is important to think about the expectations on the object. First of all, the museum is interested in preserving the object for future generations and also wanted to be prepared to be exhibited again. The visitors of the museum should be able to identify and appreciate the object as a historical, cultural heritage and as an aesthetic and artistic object. The functionality also plays an important role. Therefore, the visitors may also be interested in the playability of the instrument, or at least they want to understand how it works. To understand the original design idea and construction, the object should have a complete appearance. Missing elements could distract the attention from the overall picture, just as the inappropriate alterations. From a scientific point of view, there are still some unsolved questions. For example, are there some special features in construction or design in comparison with contemporary instruments? And can the instrument be associated with a specific region or instrument maker? With these thoughts in mind, some aims and approaches can be set. Based on those aims, measures can be planned and implemented. The concept is divided into three stages of conservation and restoration that are connected and based on each other. The first aim is the conservation, including the minimum of intervention to preserve the object. The second step is the conservation restoration, where further interventions are carried out to complete the appearance of the object. In the third step, the aim is to approximate a former condition by removing selected alterations that are obviously inappropriate and to reconstruct them adequately. Now, I would like to go in detail explaining every single step. First of all, it is important to take measures like cleaning and consolidation to prevent further loss and damage. In this step, the alterations and the ravages of time are also preserved. These measures are important, but indeed not enough to meet the expectations of the museum visitors, because the appearance of the object is still incomplete. Because of that, further measures should be taken and to complete the appearance by reconstructing missing elements, such as the name board and some parts of the key covering. The filling of eye-catching cracks can also be considered, but especially the cracks that endanger the stability of the construction, such as the cracks in the interior part of the lid, need to be fixed. In this approach, the alterations are preserved and measures are implemented due to aesthetic reasons. The values of the object need to be respected, especially the historical value should still be recognizable. And of course, measures and additions have to be documented. The result of this approach is an object that is aesthetically more pleasing, but the inappropriate alterations, such as the straight bridge, can still be confusing for the beholders. Therefore, it can and should be considered to take some further steps to approximate the former condition of the object, or rather, approaching the original design idea and construction by removing the inappropriate alterations, such as the bridge, the screws in the hitchpin block, and the wooden strip above the soundboard in the rest plank. Afterwards, the elements need to be constructed with the aid of contemporary instruments. So, what are the advantages and disadvantages of this approach? There are three major arguments to support this approach. First, the elements are obviously an appropriate instrument. Second, the original design idea and construction would be emphasized. The third argument is that the interventions will lead to an aesthetic improvement. However, there's one major disadvantage. By removing elements of the object, a part of the object biography is erased at the same time. But you can also keep in mind that removed elements can be documented and archived. Therefore, the object biography won't be completely lost. In summary, it can be said that the three stages of conservation restoration are connected and based on each other. There are many different problems and tasks for the conservator. Reconstructions need profound research, including the search for contemporary instruments that are as similar as possible. The project is still in progress. A further question to discuss would be, how important is the playability for the preservation of the object? But this question would go beyond the scope of this talk. Now that I am at the end of my talk, I would like to thank the following people for their support and advice. Here you can also see a short list of sources I can highly recommend. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you, Susanne, for your talk. This was great and very clear and a great structure. Both your approach to explain also the terminology as well as the possibilities for conservation really fits really great in today's theme, just perfectly. But let's quickly proceed. Time is running, as you know, to our second paper presentation of today. I'm proud to announce Róisín Beirne from the University of Lincoln. Her talk is about a problem which always pops up during structural consolidation of wood: how to prevent consolidated wood from color change. So let's hear what Róisín is telling us. Róisín, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Hi there. Thank you. Thanks very much. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, super. Good evening, everyone. I am delighted to be able to give my presentation this evening, as outlined, titled Consolidation of Wood Without Color Change. This will outline some aspects of the conservation treatment of a bell clapper from Stickford Church in Lincolnshire that I carried out under the supervision of Henning Schulze as part of my Master's in Conservation of Cultural Heritage at the University of Lincoln. Specifically, I'll be discussing the challenges, as just said, faced in testing and the successful application of cyclododecaine as a barrier layer to protect the wooden surface from discoloration during injection consolidation with a paraloid B72 solution. So, before we go any further, I feel I should answer this question, which was the very first question I had to ask myself upon receiving this item for conservation. What is a bell clapper? A clapper is the internal pivoting part within a bell that strikes against its inside edge, the sound bow, which is this edge here, to create a single strong resonant tone. The ball is the part of the clapper that strikes the bell. It would swing like this. And in this object, it was flattened on its outside edge all around with two areas on opposing sides where it would have repeatedly struck the bell. Below the ball is the flight, which is specifically weighted to control the speed of the clapper's swing within its particular bell. Clappers are made to a precise weight for the bell that they're hung with in order to be able to bring out the right tones of that bell. So this is the Stickford Church Bell Clapper. It's lying on its side right now. It is a box-type composite bell clapper of wrought iron and ash wood, which probably dates from the 15th century. It consists of a single piece of iron, which forms a stem. It runs all along here, the stem, the ball, and the flight. The upper third of the iron stem is encased in this wooden assembly, which is made in two parts. You can just see the crack there, the joint line, and it's secured in position by these iron straps and bolts. The wooden assembly provides a hole, you can see it here, from which the clapper would have been hung inside the bell. The wood sections are shaped internally around the iron stem, and they have two protruding arms. You can just see the edge of one here at the top of the stem, which gives it a secure hold for the metal section within the wood. The top of the wooden assembly is chamfered roughly around the hole. The straps and bolts then compress the wooden sections together, and the compression from these straps at the lower end of the assembly here has dented the wood beneath them, and there's black staining on the wood around the iron, indicating the high tannin content of the wood. So this clapper is, as I said, from Stickford. It's from St. Helen's Church here in Lincolnshire. The church bell, as you can see here, with which the clapper would have functioned, is a typical English church bell. It's cup-shaped and cast from a resonating bronze alloy. It has a U-shaped iron crown staple, which would be inside the bell about here, fixed internally, from which the clapper would have hung. The mark of John Celiac, who's a bell founder active in Nottingham from 1470 to 1507, is stamped on the side of the bell and this banner here. The sound bow of the bell cracked in 1939, and after some consideration about trying to repair the bell, which didn't seem feasible, it was lowered to the base of the church tower, where it has remained until recently, when it was relocated to where you see it now. During renovation works to the rear of the church. It was during these works that the clapper was rediscovered, and it was almost thrown away as a rusty piece of metal until one of the church wardens realized what it was. It is the timber section of the clapper, of this particular clapper, that defines it as a box-type clapper, and it also helps to confirm its approximate age. Similar box-type clappers are often found in bells dating from around the 15th century, 15th, 16th century. This image to the right shows the original wooden sections here, and you can see where the protruding arms inside would have, of the top of the metal section of the stem would have been. This wooden section here is from one clapper of the 6 bells of St. Mary Magdalene's Church in Worcester, and it dates from 1651. And then this is a replacement assembly which was constructed to return the bells to operational use in 2011. The Stickford Church bells, however, were most likely used only for swing chiming, as there has only ever been 2 bells used in this belfry, as opposed to the 4 to 16 bells that can be used in the musical art of church bell change ringing. which these ones from Worcester might have been used for. Swing chiming is a simple method, as you can see here, where the bell is hung downwards from a pivoting beam, known as a headstock, that allows the bell to swing backwards and forwards when pulled by a rope. The bell would have been secured to the headstock by iron straps passed through the bell's cannons, which is these pieces here, and the clapper would have most likely been suspended from the crown staple, as I said, inside the bell here, by a baldric fitting, which is a looped metal strap with a thick leather band that would have helped to reduce the friction and would also have provided some insulation against vibrations. In the early 1700s, full circle ringing, like in this diagram here, was invented to provide greater control of bell speed that's required for change ringing. And the mechanisms and manufacture of bell ringing advanced in technology because of this. Clappers were no longer composite timber and iron, like in the Stickford Bell Clapper, but instead were made of one solid piece of wrought iron instead. So, the condition of this bell clapper when it was first received for conservation treatment was incredibly poor. The surface of the wood has a considerable amount of insect flight holes. Upon first receiving the object, there was a thin coating of boar dust covering most of the wooden surface, and within the plastic bag that had encased the wooden assembly, as you can see in the image. There was also a small detached fragment within the bag indicating active insect infestation. The flight holes are around and about 1.5 to 2 mil in diameter on average, indicating the presence of Anobium punctatum, the common furniture beetle. Empty pupated larvae skins and frass were retrieved from inside the flight holes and analysed under ×40 magnification and cross-referenced to confirm that it was in fact Anobium punctatum. The density and strength of the wood was tested by very light probing, just with fingertips, particularly along the top here and one side, this side, of the wooden assembly was lighter and hollow sounding, and an area of loss had already occurred at the top, adjacent to which the fragment had detached. The exposed area of loss was extremely fragile and friable. Okay, next slide. As the bell with which this clapper was used is no longer functioning, the community of Stickford would like the clapper to be displayed alongside its medieval bell in St. Helen's Church. The treatment plan was therefore devised to this end. The treatment aim was firstly to preserve and protect the materials of the clapper by consolidation and stabilization in a manner that would cause minimal alteration to the object's original material and also prevent or at least slow its deterioration. As a large portion of the clapper's significance lies in the fact that it is a box-type clapper, an earlier form of clapper construction that I just mentioned, that predates the development in bell hanging and use that occurred with the rise of change ringing from the 17th century. It was felt that the treatment should improve the visual understanding of the clapper's manufacture and use. To this end, the treatment aimed to remove cumulative accretions that were obscuring details, as well as reducing the visual impact of areas of damage. It was felt, though, that the pale tones of the untreated ash should be considered a distinctive aspect of the object's original material also, capable of relating information about the history of the object, its manufacture, use, and age. So, as we all know, the use of a dissolved resin, such as paraloid B72 in solution, is a common and proven method for consolidation of insect-damaged timber due to its reversibility and ease of application. This form of consolidation, however, produces an unfavorable shiny color saturation, particularly on an untreated wooden surface like on the clapper. The preservation of the original material from damage by strengthening is often considered to be sufficiently crucial to outweigh this aesthetic alteration. As noted by Rivers and Umney, consolidation should not interfere with preserving evidence of the quality of the material, the craftsmanship of its manufacture, and adaptations that might have occurred to the materials or object through its life. Therefore, some consideration was given to developing a symbiotic consolidation system that might fulfill the diverse needs of this wooden assembly, strengthening the fragile wood without drastically altering its appearance. So my supervisor Henning Schulze pointed me towards cyclododecane as a material with the potential to fulfill these needs. Cyclododecane, a saturated cyclic alkane, is a white waxy solid at room temperature, and it's unique in its ability to sublime also at room temperature, leaving virtually no residue. It was first introduced to conservation in 1995 and is now regularly used on a diverse range of materials as a temporary and reversible consolidant, binding medium, adhesive, among other uses. It's most commonly known for use in archaeological conservation today as a consolidant and support before block lifting. There are also many published case studies of its use as a hydrophobic mask to protect areas of an object during treatments that might involve water. However, it was difficult for me to find many papers or references, in English anyway, to its use as a surface barrier against a consolidant solution. These papers that I have here provided the groundwork for determining a treatment suitable for the specific needs of this bell clapper, and most particularly this one by David Burton from 2009, outlining his testing of cyclododecaine as a temporary hydrophobic barrier layer during consolidation of balsa wood. Sorry now. In Burton's paper, he notes that the relationship between the exclusion layer, the barrier layer, and consolidant is vital to the success of the overall treatment. So the following slides will outline the challenges faced in selecting a consolidant solution that could work effectively alongside the cyclododecaine. As stated by Unger, Schneiwand, and Unger, solvents with higher evaporation rates can cause reverse migration of consolidant polymer back toward the surface of the wood, resulting in the formation of a dense shell of polymer in the surface layers of the object instead of being evenly distributed throughout. They recommend toluene as a solvent with an ideal evaporation rate, but note that in cases where a faster evaporating solvent might be required, that the rate of evaporation can be controlled by the use of plastic films. They also note that pre-wetting of the object with the same solvent used in the consolidant solution can reduce the surface tensions in the wood and increase penetration of the consolidant. Following research by Kucherova-Drunkova in 2009, toluene and xylene are considered the most suitable solvents for use with wood. Unfortunately, however, cyclododecaine is soluble in a range of nonpolar solvents, including these. So the consolidation solution to be used with cyclododecaine needs to be polar. Rivers and Umney state the paraloid B72 showed more adhesion in ethanol and acetone than in toluene, and when delivered in these polar solvents, it can impart greater strength to the treated wood despite non-polar solvents providing better penetration of wood. Trastaro, Timur, and Campion's research from 2011 also states that 5% and 10% paraloid B72 solutions in a 1-to-1 ethanol acetone solution are better absorbed than corresponding percentages in toluene. In considering the viscosity and the concentration of the paraloid B72, it was noted that penetration of consolidant is greatest with a liquid of a low surface tension, low viscosity, and slow evaporation rate, applied in multiple applications. Burton's study from 2009, however, suggested that if the viscosity of the consolidant solution is too low, the effectiveness of the cyclododecaine as a barrier layer may be reduced. Trastaro, Timur, and Campion also concluded from their study in 2011 that while absorption of consolidant may be greatest in a low viscosity solution with a low concentration of about 5% paraloid B72, retention of that consolidant was higher with a concentration of 10 to 15%. And this was a concentration which reinforces Burton's recommendations. Taking all of this into account, a consolidation regime of 2 applications of 10% paraloid B72 weight to volume in an ethanol acetone 1-to-1 solvent mixture was followed by 2 applications of 15% concentrations in order to trial the efficiency of cyclododecaine as barrier layer. I should also note this was carried out after pre-wetting the timber with an ethanol acetone 1-to-1 solvent mixture. Rowe and Rosaic's article in 2008 notes the cyclododecaine does not form a truly homogeneous film, but rather it coalesces into needle-like crystals. If you remember in the image I showed a few slides ago. The density and properties of this crystal-like structure vary widely according to how the wax is applied, producing films that might be suitable for different purposes. Understanding these differences is crucial for developing a successful treatment plan, they say. Both Burton and Rowe and Rosaic note that the rate of sublimation for cyclododecaine at room temperature is significantly longer when used as 100% melt. 2 to 3 times longer than when it's applied in solution. Therefore, it was deemed appropriate to trial the efficiency of alternate concentrations. Cyclododecaine was applied onto an insect-damaged test surface in these different forms here as 100% cyclododecaine hot melt, in a melted concentration of 90% as well as 80% white spirit weight to volume, and in commercially purchased aerosol form. After each injection treatment, the object was wrapped in plastic film to slow the solvent evaporation. 4 hours were left between treatments to allow full evaporation of the solvent and setting of the polymer. The results were the 100% cyclododecaine melt proved an effective surface slip barrier with no discoloration of the test wood surface occurring following the consolidation. The 90% and 80% cyclododecaine melt with the white spirit were less effective. The 80% dilution resulted in a patchy discoloration of the surface, which is pretty unpleasant. The aerosol application was completely ineffective. Burton's tests and the reviews of Rowe and Mosaic state that when solidifying, cyclododecaine coalesces into needle-like crystals. The speed of cooling determines the density and the size of the crystals. So the 100% cyclododecaine melt cooled at a fast rate, producing smaller and more tightly packed crystals, and thus was a more effective barrier, while the 90% melt cooled slightly slower, resulting in the formation of larger crystals, less densely packed, and thus slightly less effective barrier, which you can see here in this image. As cyclododecaine cools and solidifies very rapidly once removed from a heat source, particularly as 100% melt, the initial testing of the 100% melt was applied by pouring it directly from a heated beaker onto the test surface. Attempts to use a heated glass pipette, as recommended by Rowe and Mosaic, were not effective, unfortunately. Pouring from the beaker resulted in a dense film approximately 2 to 3 millimeters thick, which after 4 weeks, this film had only sublimated to a thickness of approximately 1 millimeter. An alternate method of sprinkling flakes of cyclododecaine onto the wood surface and melting them with a temperature-controlled, electronically heated spatula was trialed also and allowed for greater control of the film depth, resulting in a thickness of about 0.5 to 1 mil, which still provided a suitable barrier layer. As the consolidant solution is delivered into the object by injection through the flight holes, it was necessary to find a suitable method to prevent it from blocking up these holes. In the test samples, wooden sticks were carefully inserted into the holes before application of the cyclododecaine. The wooden surface of the clapper, however, was more densely covered with holes than the sample. A detached fragment, which you see up here, from the top of the clapper is measuring approximately 9 centimeters squared, required 30 sticks. The entire surface area of the whole wooden assembly is approximately 2.35 meters squared, which were to require the same quantity of sticks as the detached fragment would amount to 7,832 little cocktail sticks. Excuse me. Alongside this, the density of holes in the clapper made the use of the heated spatula between the sticks difficult. So instead, an even film was applied to the wooden surface, and the pointed tip of the spatula was used to melt the cyclododecaine away from the flight holes. This proved to be counterproductive in the end, as there was instances where the hole was slightly larger or there was a thicker layer of cyclododecaine and it would flow into the hole and solidify inside. In most instances, the pointed tip of the syringe was capable of piercing through the cyclododecaine, though in some cases it was just too thick. In the end, a combined system was used of inserting wooden sticks into only a portion of the holes, allowing enough room to effectively use the heated spatula between them. This method was slower and more awkward than just applying a solid even film, but in the end more effective, as it ensured the majority of flight holes remained open to receive the consolidant solution. It took 3 days to apply a film of cyclododecaine between 0.5 to 1 mil thick over the entirety of the wooden surface and around its metal components, after which it was noticed that some areas that had been treated on the first day with a thinner layer of cyclododecaine had already begun to sublimate away. The clapper had not been sealed with a plastic film between application during these days. Once the consolidation treatment began, after reapplying the cyclododecaine to a thicker level, and the clapper was wrapped in a plastic film to slow the evaporation of the solvents in the consolidant. The sublimation of the cyclododecane was also slowed and did not require any further applications to seal the surface. For further treatments, I would recommend applying a film of about 1 millimeter and wrapping the object in a plastic film between cyclododecane application treatments if it takes longer than 1 day. Following the completion of the consolidant treatment, some experiments were made to speed the sublimation of the cyclododecane. It was noted in numerous papers that increasing the airflow and temperature would speed up sublimation. But after trialing the effectiveness of a heat gun held at a safe distance from the wood, it became apparent that another method would be needed. Instead, the cyclododecane was mechanically removed by using the heated spatula to wick it from the surface of the wood into tissue paper. This reduced the thickness of the film over the surface from about 1 mil to approximately 0.2 to 0.5 millimeters. After 1 week, the majority of the cyclododecane had sublimated away, and flaking and friable particles could be gently brushed away with a stiff brush. But some darker areas were still visible on the surface, as you can see from this image here to the right. The cyclododecane was again wicked away from these surfaces into the tissue paper. Following another week, there were still pockets of unsublimated cyclododecane on the surface, as you can see in this image here, and in the crevices and cracks, which you can just see along here. It became apparent, though, that there was a thin coating of the consolidant that was preventing it from sublimating away in these areas. So acetone was swabbed over these, and then followed by wicking, and finally gentle brushing with a stiff brush to remove the last of the cyclododecane. So these images here show the wood surface 3 weeks after the consolidation treatment. There is no evidence of cyclododecane could be discerned by visual inspection. Due to the size and weight of this object and the resources that we had to hand, it was not possible to weigh it before and after treatment to be certain that all of the cyclododecane has fully sublimated from deep within any cracks or holes. I was very satisfied with the treatment. The cyclododecane proved an effective barrier, and it managed to preserve the pale and undarkened tone of the wood surface. And the results attainable with this procedure will most definitely inform my future decision making in wood consolidation. In all, the time estimation for this project, however, was quite unsuccessful. The research, the testing, the cyclododecane application and consolidation all took nearly twice as long as originally was estimated for each. This can mainly be attributed to untried use of cyclododecane, however, but I would recommend considering the time investment that may be required if using this procedure. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope this has been of interest to you.
Yes, thank you, Róisín. This is really interesting, and it's like always, it took more time than you planned. But we will now proceed to the first Q&A session of the evening. Andreas, I think you have some questions.
Yes, there are some questions in the chat box. Friedemann, Susanne, and Róisín, please turn on your microphones only when we address a question to you. The first question from the audience comes from Kaja Schonfelder, and it is to Friedemann. What do you think of playing the original instrument once, recording it, and using a video for presenting the object of the public instead of a copy of the instrument? What do you think about that, Friedemann?
Microphone, yeah. Sounds fine. There are many buts against this. The question is, how true can a one and only recording give the sound of what it once sounded? Actually, that is the major question. Any attempt to playability cannot guarantee that we really hear what the instrument sounded like in the very beginning. And then think of a piano. Stringing it up, bringing it to tension means so much tension on a wooden body that I think there are always problems. So there may be cases when this is justified, but in general, I have my doubts.
Thank you. Another question comes from my dear colleague Angelika Rauch. How do you feel about reversing historic alterations in order to bring the instrument back to its presumed original state of for historic performance practice?
Well, this is a question that certainly is relevant with organs, especially big church organs. And these instruments must be used, or they've got to be thrown out of a church. In such a case, I'm quite in favor of reusing it and by revoicing it, bringing it to what was the assumed original sound. And I have to admit that there are examples that are, by their sound, just overwhelming. But with other instruments, I have my doubts. But with organs, yes. Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, the next question comes from Wermut Kreb. Do you think there is a difference in the opinion on usability of musical instruments compared to the usability of furniture? And another question of her, in the argument for the need for the instrument to be played again, should then also the original sound be preserved? And how is that determined?
Oh, big question. Yes, I have an old chest which I love, and I'm happy to use it. I think it's up to the restorer conservator to find a solution to that, and I don't think there's a general rule for that. But there are things that should be used. There are other things that, in my view, should not be used so much. Well, think of cannons which you shouldn't shoot off because they would probably explode. Think of steam engines and the enormous pressure in the kettle, etc. So discuss it with your colleagues and your superiors or your inferiors, whoever.
Okay, we will do that, Friedemann, you can be sure. One comment of Christina Linsenmeier, she mentions that very recently, since its first meeting in December 2020, there is a new conservation interest group formed in SimSim. You can contact Jens Schnittker, who is leading this, or Sebastian Kirsch, if you want to learn more, just as a remark. Let's proceed to the next questions for Susanne, Friederike.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. Susanne, could you unmute your microphone? Yes, okay, fine. So the first question comes from Leo Schulz. Are there any similar or almost similar instruments to this, for example, built by the same maker of the pianos, that can be analyzed in order to develop a stringing concept, for example?
Yeah, interesting question. Thank you for that. There are a few instruments, especially 4 selected ones, at the collection of the Germanisches Nationalmuseum in Nürnberg that are comparable and that I would like to see by myself, but because of the situation with the pandemic and also I am not able to. So far, I depend on the information that I can get from the local conservators to give me some details about the instruments. So far, I don't have one instrument that perfectly fits. And because most of the preserved instruments are very individual, I'm sure that there won't be just one instrument that perfectly fits. So this is still in progress.
Okay, so work in progress. Great, thank you. And the next question comes from Fabian Neiskenwirth. He wants to know, is the straight bridge not considered an historical part of the instrument? Why take it away?
Yeah, that's also a very, very good question. And I thought the same way at first for quite a long time. But then I thought about what are the expectations on the object for the visitors. And this bridge, when you stamp for these objects, yeah, looks very, very strange. Even for those who don't know such instruments, it's very not good made. So, yeah, can I also say, and there are the traces of the original bridge, so the form can be reconstructed, and looking for similar instruments, there can be a reconstruction. So I would consider that rather than leaving it like this. It also looks a kind of, someone said to me, it looks a kind of trashy. So we don't want that, and we don't want to present that. And yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, thank
Thank
you,
you,
Susanne.
Susanne.
So we go on to the questions for Róisín. Andreas?
Yes, please unmute your microphone.
I'm unmuted.
I'm here. Please unmute your microphone. Okay.
Can you hear me now? Yes.
First question from Arlen Higginbotham.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. First question from Arlen Higginbotham. Did you consider boudoir B98 as a consolidant? It has a higher glass transition temperature than B72 and has lower viscosity in alcohols. Did you consider that?
I briefly considered, and I did seriously, sorry, I should say, consider boudoir B98. Burton's paper from 2009 used the boudoir, but I wanted, I guess, because paraloid B72 is often more commonly used, I wanted to see how effective the cyclododecane would be against it. That answers the question.
Okay. Two questions from Alma Ben Yosef. First, was there an option of immersing the object in cyclododecane and prick the holes later? And secondly, how did you measure the film thickness in situ?
There wasn't really the option to immerse it, and when I applied the using the heated spatula, I applied an even layer over a section of it. There was just difficulty pricking the holes and melting them away, and it just also it's waxy at room temperature, so if it's too thick you cannot actually see through it clearly enough to see the holes. It is something that could possibly be considered. The other factor to take into consideration is it's a composite object with metal, and it's also very large. It's 890 millimeters long, so nearly a meter long, and it was not possible, and I didn't necessarily want to have to take it apart to treat the wood. So I was trying to find treatments that would interfere with the metal as little as possible. So how did I measure this? I didn't measure them precisely. It's more of an approximation. I was just judging by eye what 1 mil was. I didn't use an instrument. It was just judging by looking at the depth. You can see it on the surface and how it sublimates away.
There are more and more questions to your contribution, and I would like to suggest that we have 2 more questions and then make a break, because we are running really out of time here. Helmut Krepp, she wants to know, was the object first treated to kill the beetle larvae? How was it done?
Yes, it was treated straight away. That was the first thing I did before any testing or anything. The object was wrapped tightly in plastic, and because, again, the size of it, I put it in a controlled freezer at -30 degrees for 5 days. Before putting it in the freezer, I kept it at a room temperature just to keep the humidity, like just to ensure that there wasn't too much moisture content in it before putting it into freeze. And then again, after removing it from the freezer, leaving it sit for a few days, just again, to avoid too much moisture change. Yes.
Okay, thank you. One last question of Alice B. How did you just bring the paraloid in the object?
I injected it in, if that is what that means. But so it was a paraloid B in solution, as I said, in 1:1 acetone ethanol at a 10% and 15%, and then I used a syringe to inject it into the flight holes. It took quite an amount of time to cover the entirety of the object. Yeah.
I think that was the question. So sorry for now not letting more questions, but you can tell those questions to, you can answer them in the chat if you want to. Yes, now we are going to take a little break of 10 minutes, like we are used to. We now have 2027, and at 2037 we will meet again. Please relax, get yourself a cup of tea or beer and chips. See you again in 10 minutes. Bye.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Hope you had a lovely little break over there and are ready for more action. Our first after the break is Kaja Schonfelder. And Kaja comes from the University of Hildesheim, and she will present a baroque guitar made by Joachim Tielke. And we all know about Joachim Tielke, as Friedemann Hellwig is doing some research on him, which comes from and the guitar from Kaja comes from the collection of the Germanisches Nationalmuseum. Kaja, the stage is yours.
So, hello. I hope you can see me now.
We can't see you, but we can hear you. So just
yeah, it says I had a badge internet, so may I do it without the video?
Yes, it's always the problem with the internet connection. So don't worry about it and just go ahead with your presentation. That's
Yeah, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to my presentation about the multi-dimensional curvature and integrate marquetry and exquisite manufacturing. It's an examination of the manufacturing techniques and experimental reconstruction of a baroque guitar by Joachim Tielke. I would like to take this opportunity to talk about a project I worked on in my internship semester and my bachelor's thesis from December 2017 to June 2018. The reconstruction build took about 2 months. So to make it as understandable as possible, I divided my presentation into 6 parts. First, I'll give you a very short introduction to Joachim Tielke and what is special about exactly this guitar. Then we will move on to a more detailed description. In the main part, I will concentrate on the manufacturing techniques and the reconstruction of the guitar body. Finally, I will show you the results won by the reconstruction progress and end with a conclusion. So who is Joachim Tielke? So Friedemann Hellwig mentioned him before. Until today, 174 instruments have been attributed to Joachim Tielke's workshop. His use of elaborate inlay and marquetry, finest materials, and exquisite workmanship on the diverse array of his creation placed him among the greatest master instrument makers of the late 17th century. Between the 174 instruments are 26 guitars. The discussed instrument has 2 defining characteristics, which set it apart from the other 26 known guitars of Tielke's workshop. It is the only instrument with decorations not made from precious materials, such as ebony, ivory, or tortoise shell. With the guitar, Tielke kept to using only 2 different woods for the body's marquetry. Additional to the marquetry on the guitar's bottom, the guitar bottom is curved longitudinal and transversely, a shape only seen on a few other guitars of this manufacturer. The inner layer of the body marquetry consists of only a layer of linen glued to the bottom and to the frame. The baroque guitar is currently part of the collection of Nürnberg's Germanisches Nationalmuseum and was made around 1684. It is not signed, but due to its stylistic and constructive characteristics, it can be attributed to the Hamburg instrument maker Joachim Tielke. The body had a length of 442 and a width of maximum of 20 millimeters. Total length of the guitar is 835 millimeters. So unlike today's guitars, this one is quite small. The guitar has 5 sets of strings. The marquetry of the frame and bottom is made from 2 different woods. A linen is glued on the inside of the marquetry. A real carrier material doesn't exist. The multi-dimensional curved bottom is divided in 3 parts, which are separated by smaller stripes. There's more marquetry on the back of the neck and the pack box. In contrast with frame and body, this marquetry is made from ebony and ivory. Ebony and ivory are also found on the outlinings of the sound hole and the guitar top. The methods of the guitar have a geometrical build-up. The plastical design shows a multi-dimensional curved body. The marquetry on the guitar's bottom is curved longitudinal and transversely. In longitudinal direction, the bottom shows a S-shaped curve. It shows a longer upper curve and a smaller contra curve in the lower area. The S shape is pronounced differently in the middle and on the sides. In transverse direction, the bottom shows also a curvature, as you can see on the transverse sections. In the waist area, the strongest curves and counter curves are found. The curvature of the bottom is very special, so it is formed against the nature of fiber materials. So the wood is forced into its shape. So if you ever try to bend a paper in transverse and longitudinal direction, so you definitely gonna miss this. It doesn't work. So there had to be much force to bend this in this shape. The marquetry of the neck, pack box, frames, and bottom shows all floral ornaments, and it always made out of 2 different material or woods. The middle segment of the bottom is the only part which shows 2 tendrils instead of only 1 tendril. So next I pass to the manufacturing techniques. First, the construction of the bottom neck joint. In most guitars, this joint is made in the so-called Spanish manner or as an Italian model. But Joachim Tielke made a kind of combination of these 2 models, or kind of a new vision of the Spanish manner. The Spanish manner normally shows a continuity which pass into the neck. The frames stick in 2 grooves and are pressed with 2 wedges. There's no head block used in Spanish manner. The Italian models had a head block in the inside, which is only nailed into the heel on the outside. So it's a really simple method. In Tielke's lutes and guitars, there's a continuous heel, but also a head block, and the head block is divided in 2 parts. So the head block is necessary during the making process, because the frames are glued to the head blocks during the making process, and the head block is divided after making the body. And the most guitars are linings found as support construction and additional glue areas. At Tielke's guitar, there's only a lining between frame and guitar top. So between frame and bottom, the inner layer is overlapping, but there's no additional glue area or constructive support. Only the linen is putting a little bit of constructive support to this really small glue area between frame and bottom. The next part of interest is the marquetry. The joints between the marquetry are very small, so yeah, you can see in the CT scans that the cut is rectangular. So the thread saw blade had to be a very small blade. Yeah. A main question was how the veneer was forced into a multiple curved form. Roubaud describes different methods of wood bending, which may be assumed to music instruments Yeah, the first one is rubbing the veneer with a veneering hammer. The second one is pressure to deform the pressure pieces, wooden pressure pieces, and a stick press between the object and the ceiling. But both methods needed a carrier material. The third method is bending the veneer with moisture on a hot iron. So that's the only one which doesn't need a carrier material. So I want to show you the considerations of the reconstruction of the body. The considerations were made from Sebastian Kirsch. He thought about that the bottom and frame get adjusted and glued together about the inside form. The marquetry is glued together on paper during the progress. Bending the frames with moisture on a hot iron was the main thought of bending the veneers into the form. The bottom, he thought, should be bent with hot sandbags. To prove this consideration, he first jokingly said that I would build a reconstruction body in the remaining 6 weeks of my internship in the Germanisches Nationalmuseum. So I never built a guitar before, but I thought it might be fun. First, I built an inside form out of poplar. The rough form was sawed with a bandsaw and glued together. Then there had to be the carving. And out of the CT scans of the guitar, I made some templates to check the form during the carving. So I always stick them up on my inside form and check if I'm doing it right. For the marquetry, I had to trace the outlines from the original, copy the tracings to have templates for the cut and counter and cut veneers, counter-cut veneers. So I made some more templates of this marquetry and glued them later on the veneers. So the next part was a real lot of thread work. So the two veneers were glued together with an intermediate layer of newspaper. The marquetry template were glued on top. With a thread saw, the ornaments were cut out. With a bit of water and thin metal piece or scalpel, the fragments were easily devised after it. The next step were to clean the parts from the newspaper and template paper, and then replacing the parts. So we had the replaced ornaments. The replaced parts were glued together with a combination of bone and hide glue. They were glued on a paper. The work progress shows that there had to be pressure during the gluing, and it doesn't work without pressure. After cutting out all the parts, it came to the bending work step. I bent all parts on this bending iron, which wasn't out of iron, so it was brass, and it was not a commercial one. It was a self-made one, and the heat sticks inside this brass. I firstly bent some test pieces without marquetry. So for even pressure, I use a metal sheet out of spring steel. With loving movements, the wood was heated and then carefully bent with pressure over the iron. I first tried to bend test pieces with moisture, but during the drying of the pieces of different woods worked very different. So the Moninga wood get wider, the Acer get even tighter. So that doesn't work when they come together. So on a test piece with marquetry, the two woods work very different. Also, the paper and the glue came from the woods and sticked on the bending iron, so bending with moisture was not an option. The next try was bending without moisture. There had to be more sensitivity during the bending, but it worked very well and the pieces stayed in shape. So first the frames were bent. After each curve, I proved the form on the inside form. So next step was to glue the frames on the heat and tail block, which you can see on this part and on this part. So to bend it together, I used some counter pieces, and here was the bending. Here's the gluing of the bended frames. After drying, the frame parts had to be planed onto the inside form. The second bending step was the parts of the bottom. They were kind of difficult because of the counter curvings. So it was possible to bend all curves on the bending iron, but to be bent part after part and always glued together before bending the next part. The biggest bending problems came with the stripe between the segments. There were the part with the smallest curves and the most twisted part. The progress showed that they had to be much wider as thought on the first step. So with the wider stripes, it was possible to match the stripes by planing, and so they get really small later, but first they had to be wide to close all the gaps. For the bottom part, the pieces were piece by piece glued together. On some parts with the help of nails, which were only hammered in the inside form, and wedges to get the pressure. For the outer parts, they had to be pressed together with clamps, a lot of clamps. Now I had two parts, so the frame and the bottom. And gluing them together needs again a lot of clamps and good preparation. So for violins and guitars exist special clamps. On a threaded rod, a round piece can be screwed down for the to the handle. After drying, the protruding parts of the bottom were planed flat. And it comes to the exciting part of removing the inside from the body and hoping it goes all very well. Lightly hammering on the head and tail block removes it step by step. So I forgot to mention that I put some tape and wax on the inside form as a preparation before the whole gluing and bending was done. The whole bending and gluing progress had to be done twice, so I had the premiere and the counterparty, and I had two bodies. Yeah. After that step, I glued in the linen, and I made some parts without linen for the upcoming neck and heel. The glue was also bone and hide glue in a 50-50 mixture. So for each body, I needed about 30 to 40 milliliters of glue. The last step I've done with the bodies were scraping up the paper from the bodies and planing them, and plane on the last curvature on the side stripes. The construction of the bodies gives us some results. So the inside form was definitely reusable and can be used for more guitar bodies like this. So the gluing the marquetry glue together with pressure, not without pressure, because otherwise the pieces don't stick together very well during the bending. The bending had to be done without moisture. So all the bending can be done with one moment, please. So all the bending can be done on the bending iron. Parts with very thin and small glued areas due to come up due to constructive problems. So as a conclusion, the guitar is an important piece of instrument making in northern Germany, and it has a special status due to its form and selection of materials. The reconstruction of the guitar body can be shown as an examination method. So do all the non-invasive methods for examinations of the guitar had now the reconstruction as a new one. And the reconstruction led to a second guitar body, so the contrapartie, and it gives an idea of how it may have looked like. And yeah, so I thank you for your attention.
And thank you, Kaja, for your really great talk. And it shows that in our field, the reconstruction and using historical techniques is a very important part. But before we can discuss this, let's go to the posters.
Okay, next it's my honor to announce the poster presentation of Tirza from the University of Antwerp. Tirza inspired us already in the first ConNext evening session in April with her contribution concerning maritime half-hull models. Her poster today is about the conservation treatment of a very prestigious organ clock case. Tirza, you have the floor.
Thank you, Andreas. Well, as my connection is quite poor, I don't even try to get the camera on, but I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
everything
great.
Fine.
Okay, so 5 years ago, the Museum Speelklok in Utrecht acquired this prestigious organ clock, which was produced in the late 1730s by Charles Clay, a London-based horologist. The clock and its organ mechanisms have been restored by the expert conservators of Museum Speelklok, and I was so fortunate to treat the clock case in the furniture conservation studio of Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. In this poster presentation, I will tell you briefly about the object and its condition, decision-making, and the treatment. So, you see the clock here. The oval life-size clock case is composed of a pedestal with a dome. The construction wood of the case is oak and pine, veneered with both mahogany and ebony. The object is ornamented with gilt bronze decorations and brass moldings. The clock dial is located in the front arch and is relatively small. It is incorporated into a large copper plate decorated with reliefs and an oil painting. The musical mechanism consists of an organ clock which plays a variety of airs by George Friedrich Handel. At first sight, the clock case looked in fair condition. A closer look, however, revealed that the gilt bronze, silver and brass decorations and moldings were dirty and corroded. The big picture on the left shows the silver Minerva figure that is located on top of the dome. The silver has tarnished severely over the years. Next, you see a detail of the corroded brass and fire gilt ornaments. This slide gives an impression of the many losses and missing pieces of the mahogany veneer. There are numerous lacunae both in the veneer and the carved mahogany elements. The solid wood of the plinth and the panels was cracked, and the veneer in these zones had split, was blistering and discolored. Overall, the surface finish of the pedestal had a high gloss and reddish hue. Learn more about the composition of this finish. Both UV radiation and pi GCMS analysis were applied. A sample taken from the finish on the carvings, as you see on the right picture, reveals that the green fluorescence represents a mixture of pine resin, shellac, turpentine, large resin and sandarach. Scraping marks on the veneer indicate this original finish has been removed mechanically. In the areas that are more difficult to clean, like the corners of the panels and the carvings, the remains of this varnish are still present. A sample of the finish with the orange fluorescence, as you can see on the left picture, and which is to be found all over the pedestal, learns that this is a predominantly shellac finish. This shellac was applied after the original finish had been removed. So, as for decision making, we could say the architectural elements of this monumental clock case refer to the design language of Baroque and Palladianism. The brass moldings play an important role in articulating the individual parts, and they stand out against the dark mahogany and ebony. Though the initial luster of these brass elements, the silver and fire gilt decoration, has diminished due to contamination and erosion, and details are less legible. The cracks and gaps in the veneer distract from the original aesthetic of the object. Moreover, there's a risk of future material loss. And the high gloss and red color of the finish of the pedestal is perceived as hard and unaesthetic. The reflection of light sources in the high gloss surface impedes the beauty of the mahogany to be perceived. Due to the thick surface finish, the details of the carvings are less pronounced. The proposed treatment aims to increase the aesthetic and functional of the organ pendulum. This approach is reflected in restoration, of which, due to time restrictions, I will highlight only a few aspects. The high gloss finish on the pedestal was removed with ethanol gelated in Clusel G and sheets of Avalon. The brass silver decorations were cleaned and polished to a soft glass with precipitated calcium carbonate and ethanol, and the fire gilt brass was cleaned with a complex forming gel made of buffered rabbit skin glue and Japanese paper. The veneer was consolidated and lacunas were completed. The cracks in the veneer of the panels and cracks in general were filled with solid wood and finished with moldstuck. Color integration was achieved with pigments dispersed in polyvinyl alcohol. And this is the clock case after treatment. Multiple layers of beeswax and carnauba were applied. The satin patina wax allows for a three-dimensional effect of the interlocked grain of mahogany to be experienced. I must say, in reality, the pictures or the surface is a bit more glossy, but the photographer filtered the gloss as it gave too much reflection. So, like I said, these were just a few aspects of the interdisciplinary treatment, for which I'd like to thank the following people, and I'd like to thank you for listening.
So, thank you, Tirza. This was very nice poster. I think it is a very big poster. Let's go on with now the second poster pitch coming from Luisa Lessinger. And Luisa Lessinger is a student of the Fachhochschule Potsdam, and she will continue to enjoy us with her research concerning a musical instrument. In this case, she will introduce us all to the Electric Guitar Framus Atlantic 6, and maybe some in the audience already have a sound in the ear. Luisa, off you go.
Hello, and thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, good evening. The following topic is about a special decoration technique for electric guitars. But at first, I'd like to start with a few words about the origin of electric guitars and their importance for our music. Well, the origin of the electrical amplification of acoustic guitars goes back to the 1920s. The guitar in jazz and blues music functioned as a rhythmic percussion instrument, but in the big bands of that time, the instrument could not prevail against the wind instruments like the saxophone, for example. So there were first attempts to amplify the guitar electrically with microphones or pickups from telephones. However, the swinging topside of the instrument, together with the pickup, produced squeaky sounds, the so-called feedback. Perceived as annoying at the time, precisely this distortion became a sound aesthetic of its own in the following decades. And the electric guitar became a main actor in the music. New electric guitar models and new pickup systems always created new styles of music. The rock and roll of the 50s, the beat wave of the 60s, the legendary rock of the 70s. Guitar solos as an expression of the body in harmony with the audience. The social life of the youth and students was surrounded by the myth of the Cultural Revolution. Today, the sound of an electric guitar has become usual, but its revolutionary power is still saved on sound records. In the 1970s, somewhere in West Germany, this young guitarist on the right side got his first own electric guitar, the semi-acoustic model Atlantic 6 from the German company Framus, made in 1971. But he didn't really like the look and he modified the guitar, so he removed the hardware and the so-called sunburst finish on the top side of the guitar. Here you can see the back side with its original sunburst finish, and next to it, the removed side. So what leads me to the reconstruction? The object should continue to be used after the examination, so analysis with minimally invasive interventions were therefore particularly important. Evaluations of the optical properties, the mechanical resistance, and the fluorescence behavior showed the use of nitrocellulose. Nitrocellulose coatings were the main material using in guitar coatings until the 1970s. But in today's short presentation, I would like to focus on how I applied the coating. The question was whether it is possible as a non-professional luthier to produce the coating. After researching the literature and talking to luthiers, the following procedure could be worked out. Sunburst is a finish with a tradition going back to the 19th century. A yellow background is followed by shading along the body edges with red and black. Industrially produced nitrocellulose lacquer and thinner could be used as material. The colors were achieved through the empirical addition of color concentrates. All layers could be applied using high volume, low pressure systems. It was important to ensure that the flat layers were applied horizontally and with crossing lines, while the shading is done vertically. Indeed, the biggest challenge was the shading, because the goal is to create a perfect straight. For example, online you can see professional luthiers doing it in just one step going around the edge, but without training it, for me it was not possible. So what I did was to highly dilute the color concentrate with thinner and apply the shading in lots of short lines, holding the spray gun in a 45 degree to reduce the risk of spraying paint in the middle of the dummy. And yeah, as you can see in the table, the sunburst paint is a coating of 12 layers. Is followed by the colored layers with the shading and the subsequent top coat layers. In addition to the intermediate sanding, what you can see here with different sanding papers, the concentration of the lacquer is particularly important because it changes. At the beginning, there's lots of thinner and less lacquer, and for the transparent top coatings, there's more lacquer than thinner inside. After applying the lacquer and a drying time of 3 weeks, the slightly uneven surface could be polished. That happened by wet sanding it and afterwards machine sanding it with grinding paste and lambskin disc. And for the final finish, hand polishing with wool and polishing paste. And this is the end of my presentation. And thank you very much for the opportunity to take part today. Yeah, and I hope we will see us in the future. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for this excellent pitch, Luisa. We will now go on with the next Q&A session. Please, Friederike.
Yeah, thank you, Andreas. And thank you, Luisa, sharing your results with us. We now have, I must say, the conclusive Q&A sessions before we all say goodbye to you for this first ConNext session series. But again, there are a few questions in the chat box. And to Kaja, Luisa, and Tirza, for technical reasons, please turn on your microphones only when we address the questions to you. And the first question from the audience is for Kaja and comes from Julia Schulz. Thank you, Kaja. Nice work. Did the marquetry bend back at this point?
No, the marquetry banded without moisture didn't bend back at any point. So even it didn't bend back on the test pieces. So till last year, I'm very sure about this, but now the test pieces are in Nürnberg and I don't have them anymore. But the guitar body hasn't changed his measurements, so no.
Okay, great, thank you. And the next question comes from Angelica. What did you use as a surface coating in order to preserve the color contrast of the marquetry?
The bodies didn't have a surface yet because I want to build a whole guitar, but the surface we didn't examine till now.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to know, how many hours did it take you to reconstruct the guitar? Did you count them?
I haven't counted the hours, but it was 6 weeks of work on 5 days a week and about 8 hours a day. So
yeah, quite a long time. Yeah, great. Thank you. This was the question part for you, and we go on with Tirza. Andreas, it's your part.
Yes, okay. Tirza, what an amazing entertainment object. The conservation restoration was discussed in 2 different museums, the Speelklok Museum and the Rijksmuseum. Can you say how the discussion developed? Obviously, both museums agreed upon the ideas concerning the conservation restoration.
Yes, Marianne van Dijk, she's the director of Museum Speelklok, and Anne-Sophie, gosh, now I forget. I have a blackout for her name now. Anyway, Anne-Sophie, she's the conservator. They pass by every other few weeks to discuss decisions and about the object, about the clock case. And like I said, the organ and the clock mechanism were conserved in Museum Speelklok. Anne-Sophie van Leeuwen, right, here I am.
Okay, the second question is from Sophie. Were there any clues to date the coating on the carving? Were there any traces of an original coating? She wants to know.
Yeah, well, we assumed that the mixture we found, like the pine resin, turpentine, large resin, and sandarach mixture, was the original coating, and that was only to be found on the carvings and in the corners of panels. I can imagine the shellac. Well, as we may know that sandarach turns red over time, so it could be possible, but that the shellac was aiming to imitate this red color. We're not sure, of course, but I didn't find any brush strokes so I don't think the shellac was applied with a brush. And as the French polishing was only later, we can assume that there was maybe a 19th century intervention. So we saw the scraping marks on the bare wood, and this indicated that the first mix of resins was mechanically removed, just not in the corners.
Okay, thank you. Now the questions for Luisa, Friederike.
Yeah, thank you. Luisa, there is a question from Velmet. How did you keep the line at an even distance from the brim? Did you use a gig?
Well, I just exercised a lot before on paper dummies, and because I really highly diluted the color and put a lot thinner inside, there was less color by one step putting on the surface. So I had the chance to go over and over and over again until I reached the final color.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I can imagine, especially with cellulose nitrate coatings. This is really interesting. I would like to know, and this would be the last question, did you analyze the cellulose nitrate only by the diphenylamine test, or did you also analyze it to get to know the additives and the resins? So
Yeah,
did you
also
do some
by AR spectroscopy. I don't know the English word. AR spectroscopy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, is this the word for that?
I think it's the right word for that.
Spectroscopy, yes.
Spectroscopy.
Spectroscopy, thank you very much. Yes, so this was another test I made, or my professor made. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And now we go on.
Yes, I think it's
Andrea.
my turn, Friederike.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you again, Kaja, Tirza, and Luisa, for sharing your findings with us. This brings us to the end of the fifth and last ConNext session evening for 2021. I would like to thank our keynote speaker, Friedemann Hellwig, and a big thank you for all speakers of today, Susanne Klug, Róisín Beirne, Kaja Schonfelder, Tirza and Luisa Lessinger. We also like to thank our institutes and partners, and last but not least you, the audience, for listening and asking, thus making this event happen. Before you leave, we would like to give back the floor for just a moment to our dear colleagues, Sophie Glerum and Vincent Cattersale, who prepared some farewell remarks for you. Sophie and Vincent, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Andreas. Yes, the microphone should be on. On behalf of the whole organizing committee, Vincent and I would like to have some final words. We would very much like to thank all of our institutes and partners for making this event happen. And also a big round of applause to our keynote speakers for their inspirational and fascinating lectures. Furthermore, thank you all the bachelor, master, and PhD students and alumni for their hard work and their excellent, of course, presentations. Thank you very much. You were fantastic. And Vincent, I'm going off script here, so don't interrupt me yet. Before I hand the microphone over to you, I would like to ask all of you to give a virtual round of applause to Vincent especially. It was really a team effort, the whole ConNext session edition. But even in the best of teams, the load is not divided equally. And without Vincent especially, ConNext wouldn't have happened. So thank you, Vincent, very much. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I have to continue. So what I wanted to say is just once again, a big thank you for the audience for making this effort worthwhile. As we noted a few times before, we are very pleased and proud that we had over 340 participants across the 5 different sessions, from 32 research and educational institutes, and from 12 different countries. So in the end, ConNext really lived up to its ambitions of providing an international platform for you, the students, and the alumni, for sharing your hard and fascinating work. It is because of you all that this very first edition of ConNext has become a great success, and we hope you enjoyed the presentations as much as we did. We are very much looking forward to organizing our second edition next year in 2022, so please keep an eye out for the call of abstracts. Goodbye.
Bye.
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 See you next year.
Bye.
Bye.